In fact, here is the commander-in-chief. Siersky, in his social media post, notes that the enemy is increasing the intensity of offensive actions. And he emphasizes that the challenges of this winter remain among the most serious since the beginning of the war. And how do you assess the situation the commander-in-chief is talking about?
Well, of course, this winter will be difficult. Well, again, we are fully aware that it simply cannot be easy. In my estimation, it will be 20 to 30% harder than the previous 24 to 25 season, unfortunately. If we're talking about infrastructure, of course, it is much more depleted than it was in the first year, and even in the second or even the third year of the full-scale invasion. We fully understand that civilians are exhausted and the military is tired. Indeed, the fourth year of the war is coming to an end. It's already been 4 years. Of course, people are tired. Of course, it's hard. All of this comes at a great cost. But there are no other options. Unfortunately, surrender is not an option. Capitulation is not an option. Yes, unfortunately, we will have to come to an agreement. Yes, we will have to sign some kind of agreement, but there is definitely no talk of capitulation. And what the Russian Federation is doing now, what did they call it? Coercion to peace? We force for a full-fledged peace. Listen, so you have everything in your hands. Stop the fighting, stop the offensive, and peace will come immediately. No, the Russian Federation possesses a very significant and strategic calculation through massive coordinated attacks. This upcoming winter season, specifically from early December all the way until the very end of March, because by established standard and common practice it remains quite cold even at the conclusion of March, critical infrastructure is still very much in high demand, particularly for essential heating and crucial electricity generation. And they plan to hit our infrastructure as hard as possible with airstrikes, bombs, missiles, and drones, so that the position of the Ukrainian authorities becomes more pliable, more flexible, so that we don't put forward any counter-demands, and so that we quickly and clearly agree to what the Russian Federation proposes and ultimately demands. Therefore, according to my inner feeling, the fighting will continue until at least March 2026. Unless, of course, big geopolitics come into play, unless, of course, the American side gets involved on Ukraine's side, then, of course, the fighting could end much sooner.
You know, Ivan, I didn't plan to quote this particular statement in our conversation, but nevertheless, since we've touched on this topic, one Kremlin figure with a Sandy surname, the one responsible for hosting, so to speak, in this Kremlin circus, made the following statement. We are working towards peace in Ukraine, not just a ceasefire. That's quite a statement, to say the least.
I would say, pardon me for using a New Year's theme, it was the gingerbread man who said this. Let your audience try to decipher this riddle.
Ivan, what do you think? According to reports from our defenders, right now the Russian occupiers are actively trying to infiltrate the crucial northern part of Pokrovsk, which is currently being valiantly defended by our dedicated forces. In your opinion, what are the prospects and how might the situation in Pokrovsk develop? Of course, this section of the front remains the hottest, and that's why all attention is focused on it.
This is an attempt to create an encirclement. If possible, I would ask to bring up the deep state map. If that's possible. If not, we'll have to go by memory. No, that's not possible right now. Understood? Deep state shows, unfortunately, this is the only map, the only more or less verified source we can use, that right now an encirclement has closed around the Pokrovsk agglomeration. But not in the classical sense. For now, it's a gray zone. The pincers have closed around Pokrovsk, around some Ukrainian troops remain in Mirnograd, so there is no complete encirclement, but supply is extremely difficult, even by air. That's why, as we've seen in previous reports, our military made the decision to withdraw our troops from the southern outskirts of the Pokrovsk agglomeration to more secure positions. Unfortunately, we acknowledge this. It is happening. Once again, Mirnograd continues its defense. How long it will be able to hold out, we do not know. I say this sincerely, I truly don't know. It could be a week, 2 weeks, it could last until the end of the year, or maybe even continue into January. The defense. Again and again, I keep repeating the number of troops that the Russian Federation has committed to the offensive against this agglomeration. Once again, I really want your audience to listen and understand. We are not talking about some large regional center or a huge metropolis. This is an ordinary mining settlement, a working town where there used to be mines and factories. Now there is nothing left, everything has been wiped out. But the Russian army sent 170,000 soldiers to capture this settlement. For many of your viewers watching from abroad, I am sure there is a lot of confusion about this. Well, is 170 like 100,000 or 50,000? Is that a lot or a little? It sounds like a lot, but it's hard to grasp. Everything is understood in comparison. Let me give you some numbers. As of 2025, by the end of the year, the entire German army, the Bundeswehr, from the very first private to the very last general, totals 180,000 people. So imagine the entire German army picking up and moving out to storm a small town. That's in eastern Ukraine, and the entire Polish army is approximately 200,000 people. I'm saying this again so you can understand and compare the scale of the catastrophe that's happening right now, and also, truly without exaggeration, the tremendous heroism of the Ukrainian guys. And the girls who for almost 15 months now have been carrying this city on their shoulders, holding it, this entire agglomeration, not allowing the Russian advance units to capture it. Yes, it is almost captured already, I think even 3/4 or maybe a bit more, but nevertheless, it has fulfilled its task to buy time for us, to buy time for our Western friends, and it has certainly done that.
Ivan, according to reports from our defenders on the Eastern Front, including in the areas of Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, the Russians are currently suffering quite heavy losses. They don't count people, there's nothing new about that. There's even a new term that's appeared, disposable soldiers. This is exactly about this part of the front. In your opinion, what should we expect in terms of tactics from the Russian occupiers? For example, we've noticed, as we report to our viewers every day about the losses of various Russian occupiers, that for a long period during the warm season, the Russians hardly used any armored vehicles. But lately, the list of lost armored vehicles keeps growing. This means their use of armored vehicles has increased as well. What will happen next?
2 clarifications. Maybe during those periods, there simply wasn't an opportunity to deploy the equipment. For example, it might have been under repair, in storage, being restored, and not sent to the front lines. And the next clarification is that the active use of Ukrainian drones in clear weather simply turned any attempt to use heavy equipment into dust. Literally into dust. Now, taking advantage of the weather conditions in eastern Ukraine, and in fact across the entire territory of Ukraine, the weather conditions, to put it mildly, are bad. In eastern Ukraine, there is a lot of fog, and most likely under the cover of fog, they are trying to move this equipment into populated areas. What is the strategy? What is the tactic? Conceptually, nothing has changed. On foot, on scooters, on buggies, on motorcycles. They try to rush into the city using light vehicles, trying to get through minefields and barriers. Heavy equipment is only now entering Pokrovsk, for example. It took, I think, 10 to 11 months, and only then did they start bringing equipment into the city. Gradually, they managed to do it. What else is important? Infiltration by small groups. 100 distinct groups of 2 or 3 individuals, at most 5 people, who simply scatter themselves like scattered peas across the vast expanse of the land and diligently try to hide behind all sorts of diverse terrain features, ranging from small, dilapidated shell garages to large, imposing remnants of multi-story buildings, control shafts, some structures at the mines, meaning some administrative buildings. They hide in utility rooms, sit there for a week, can stay, accumulate, and then move forward. So the infiltration tactic works.
Ivan, thank you so much for finding the time to join us live today. Military analyst, employee,